Hello, friends, and welcome back to the conversation. For that matter, welcome to episode 3. We've made it this far. And this one was packed with little details. So let's jump into them. When we did the episode 2 review, one of the things we asked all of our viewers to comment on was, what did you think Wilhelm was going to say? Because in between kisses, Wilhelm told Simon, I'm not, and he didn't finish the sentence. And that's, please remember that I said that. I'm not, and he stopped. So we asked the viewers, what do you think he was going to say? And most people thought he was going to say, I'm not like that. A lot of them thought, I'm not allowed to be in a relationship like that, or I'm not allowed to be in a relationship, or, under these circumstances, whatever. But there was doubt as to what he was going to say. He did not finish that sentence. In episode 3, the episode starts with Simon inside the music room trying to play the school anthem, and Wilhelm hears him, and Simon's making mistakes with it and having trouble. So Wilhelm does what he always does. He rushes in to help Simon work it, and he sits down at the piano next to him. And you can tell by the way he's looking at him that he's not denying his feelings for Simon. But when Simon brings up this idea that, hey, we need to talk about what happened the other day, and Wilhelm interrupts it, and he says, like I said, I'm not like that. Well, that's not what he said. He didn't finish the sentence in episode 2, but he says it in this one. And so he says, we need to just forget about what happened. Now, I would like to point out that one of our, in fact, more than one, but one specific viewer of ours who happens to be Swedish told us that based on the original Swedish version, the verb he used can only mean I'm not like that. So let's enjoy this scene where Felice is actually showing herself to be, friendly. Because as she's talking with Sarah about, hey, are your parents coming to the parents' weekend? When Sarah says, well, my father won't be coming because I'm estranged from him, Felice actually shows concern and asks about it. She starts asking her personal questions. And this is an indication that Felice is particularly interested in a friendship with Sarah, because you don't ask those kinds of questions unless you're interested in that person. On the other hand, Felice is also opening up about her own private life, because she says, my dad just wants good grades for me. That's pretty much all he wants. So when we fast forward and we see that the parents are arriving for the weekend, Felice doesn't look particularly interested to see her parents. She doesn't look particularly excited. It almost looks like she's standing outside of a courtroom waiting to hear the verdict in her case. It almost looks like doom and gloom. And of course, when her father comes over to be hugged, he holds his hands out like Jesus welcoming the multitudes, but he makes no effort to wrap his arms around her. And it's almost like he expects to be worshiped, and he doesn't have to show any affection in return. So when Felice and her mother go into her bedroom, this is the first time I see the ice melt off of her mother, and she starts to show some warmth. I actually believe that Felice's mother loves Felice. And it's curious, because when I was really paying attention, it seemed to me that her mother was not necessarily putting demands on Felice. Yeah, she's kind of trying to live her own childhood or her own good memories at the school again through Felice, but I don't see where she's making any demands on Felice. And in fact, when they sit on the bed and she's asking, well, how's your love life? Are you interested in anybody? And it almost seems like out of thin air, Felice comes up with this fantasy about how Wilhelm is throwing signals at her, and she thinks there might be something between them. Well, you've been following the series along with me, and Felice has seen the things that we've seen for the most part. And when did Wilhelm show interest in any female? So where's she getting that from? And I think she's saying that in order to please her mother, or maybe to impress her mother. So she feels like she has to get really good grades for her father, and she feels like she has to reach some really high social standing to please her mother. But I haven't actually heard that out of her father's lips, through her father's lips, out of his mouth, or from her mother. It seems that she's putting this on herself. So she's got this demand of perfection for herself that nobody else is putting on her. At least that's how it seems to me so far. So even though in the beginning of this episode, Wilhelm tells Simon, let's not read too much into what that was, and, maybe let's keep our distance, Wilhelm is doing an absolutely terrible job of keeping his distance.
Not the least of which in the locker room, he's staring this dude down, which brings up the first time I'm going to ask in this episode. Does nobody realize these two are in love? Simon and his sister continue to sit in the same spot in the classroom, and Wilhelm is trying to keep his distance by moving around the classroom and sitting anywhere but next to him. And I don't believe for a moment that Wilhelm is in denial of his feelings for Simon, because even when he's in the hallway watching these, his classmate and this girl kissing, he's thinking of Simon. Which brings us to one of my absolute favorite scenes or moments in this, not only in this series, but in this particular episode, because we're seeing Wilhelm again in front of a mirror. If you remember, this is exactly where we started the season. Or excuse me, the season. With Wilhelm standing in front of a mirror looking at himself, and he was all beat up. He was black and blue. He had cuts on his face. He had dried blood on his face. And now we look at him. He looks healthy. But you can see the positive effect in just 3 episodes that we've gone from a beat up, horrible young prince to a healthy looking, mended young prince. And he's in a good place. He's in a much better place than when he started the season. With Wilhelm clearly not being in denial about his feelings for Simon, the fact that he can't stay away, the fact that he's horribly lonely without him, the fact that he is much healthier with this young man, I don't think, at the end of the day, I don't think Wilhelm has a good excuse for staying away from him. So he doesn't. So inside of their little workout area during what I assume is recreation, he walks over to Simon and says, I asked you to stay away, that we should forget about it. And you know what? I take it back. I was wrong. I would really like it if you spent the weekend with me, because I'm not going home. My parents aren't coming to the parents' weekend banquet. I'm not going home for the weekend. You live in the area. Let's spend the time together, just you and me. Thank God August won't be here.
So let's take a moment and talk about August. The first time we see August in this particular episode, he's running around the inside of the school setting up this banquet, because for the weekend, the parents are going to arrive. There's going to be a little performance in the chapel. They're going to have a lunch banquet, and then they're going to take most of their kids home for the weekend. Some kids are going to stay at the school. Wilhelm's planning on staying, but everybody else should be going home for the weekend. I find this particular scene interesting because I can envision that 10, 15, 20 years from now, this will be August's role inside of the royal family, because he is, even though he's a cousin, he's still a member of the royal family. He's always going to have a public role. And I can imagine it being his role to go, to prepare banquets, to do meet and greets, to prepare meetings. I absolutely see that happening. If we jump ahead just a little bit, in this particular episode, we see that August takes Wilhelm outside, sets up a photography session. And for a few moments, Wilhelm stands there and he does the photographs dutifully. And it seems to me that August is simply using Wilhelm as a prop. And again, looking forward 10, 15, 20 years, I can envision that the business office wall of August is going to be just completely cluttered with pictures of him and Crown Prince Eric at school, him and Prince Wilhelm at school, him and the Queen at a birthday party or something. So he's using the people around him as props. That's what August does. But they're not the only people he uses as props. So as the parents begin to arrive, we see that August's stepfather and his mother arrive in a beautiful blue Porsche. I kind of say that with a little pride because I happen to live in the city where Porsche automobiles are produced. So shout out to hometown. But this was extremely interesting to me because what are the two most important things to August? Money and status. And we hear Felice's mother tell another parent, oh, that's the man that declared bankruptcy. Well, obviously August knows this. And so this man has no money and clearly no status. So he is worthless to August. Because he's worthless to August, you know that there's going to be no respect between them. I also see that there's no respect between August and his mother because he pretends that he doesn't see her until the very last moment when she's basically up on top of him. And then he does the phony surprise to see her look. And the stepfather extends his hand to greet August. August reluctantly takes the hand, but as soon as he's done shaking hands with this man, he puts his back to him and starts walking away with his mother. Another interesting fact, I'm going to freeze the frame here for a moment. August is escorting his mother away, but this woman has just driven, I don't know how far or how long, to get here to spend the weekend with him. And within seconds of them greeting each other, he's already looking around at other people, paying attention to other people. This man is a tool. Let's talk for a brief moment about the fact that August's stepfather declared bankruptcy, because this takes us back to the first episode of the season when in the classroom they were talking about how poor people are scamming the system to get welfare money. Rich people are scamming the system to avoid paying taxes, and there was that whole debate. That's how good the screenwriting is in this story, that a few episodes later, we're taking that theoretical discussion that we saw in the classroom and seeing it played out in real life, in August's life, because it's his stepfather who's manipulating the system to avoid paying taxes. So after the parents have arrived, before the banquet, there is a performance put on inside the chapel, and at one point they're all singing the national anthem together. You remember what I said from episode 1 about Wilhelm looking at Simon and Simon looking at Wilhelm. They're doing the exact same thing here once again, but this time they are openly smiling at each other. If we look at these two young men, if we look at the way that they look at each other, I have to ask the question that I always ask about body language. How did the people in this room not realize that these two young men are in love and that there is likely a relationship between them? How does nobody see this? Maybe they do. Maybe they do and they don't comment because in Europe, by and large, people just don't care. Man, if you're happy, go be happy.
Then comes the moment when the headmistress steps up to August's mother and says, "Oh, can we speak out in the hallway? I need to tell you about the fact that your son's not paying his bills." And you can see that August is looking over and he's like, oh boy, okay, pressure building, because now he's going to have to talk with his mother.
So if we think about the three people that are probably most important in August's school life, maybe not the most important to him, but certainly in his school life, we've got Felice, we've got Wilhelm, we've got Simon. We already know that he's planning to have Wilhelm sit next to him during lunch because, of course, that's a status move, and he's going to use Wilhelm as a tool. But you've got to think that he also knows where Felice is going to be sitting. Now, it's interesting that he would arrange to have Wilhelm sitting next to him and not the girl that he's interested in. Thought that was interesting, because let's remember that Felice's parents have already been described as among the most rich in all of Sweden. So you're talking about a powerful family. You'd think you know where they were sitting. But if we fast forward a little bit to when everyone is moving into the dining hall, we see that there was no place set for Simon and Linda and Zara. So this obviously was an intentional move on August's part, because now he wants to rush in and act like, okay, well, I'm going to do you a favor by making sure that you have a table, a seat at the table, even though technically you're not allowed to be here. Let me explain to you exactly why I think that's bullshit. If we look at the people who are waiting to sit at that table, it is Felice and her extremely wealthy parents. Are you really going to tell me with a straight face that August wasn't thinking about where this powerful family was going to sit? So of course it was nonsense. And he was so intent on making Simon look foolish or hurting Simon a little bit that he was actually willing to inconvenience these extremely wealthy, powerful people. That shows you exactly what kind of a tool August is. Oh, that schmoozy face that August makes, that face that I absolutely can't stand. He's sitting at the table with his mother, his stepfather, and some other parents, and he's telling them about his plans for after school. He's going to go to university. He's going to study agricultural management, and he's going to take his father's holdings and really, do something with them. Clearly, that is a point of pride for him. Let's keep that in mind. That is the land holdings is a point of pride for him. Goes back to wealth and status. I find it really interesting here that someone says to the stepfather, "Oh, you must be you must be a very proud father. You must be very proud of your son." And both the stepfather and August jump in very quickly and say, "Oh, no, I'm not his father." And they make that distinction very clear to these folks. So the next scene I'm going to talk about, we specifically watched with the sound off to read body language. And then, of course, we listen to the dialogue, because I happen to believe this is one of the most telling scenes in the entire series. After Wilhelm makes this little photograph session with August, he excuses himself quickly, goes to his room, and telephones his brother, the Crown Prince. If you watch their body language, these two young men are friends. They clearly love each other. They clearly are very comfortable in one another's presence. I think that's very important because the Crown Prince serves as sort of like the intermediary between him and his parents, the queen and the prince consort, the king. I don't know what title he has. I might do some research on that. And this is the one person in this whole series so far that we have seen Wilhelm just completely drop the wall, the defensive wall, and he's completely real with this person. At this point, more so even than he is with Simon. And it is in this scene that Wilhelm tells his brother, hey, I know we were going to spend the weekend together, but I've decided to stay at school and do some studying. And his brother laughs. He's like, studying? Oh, you're so full of crap. You've met somebody. And Wilhelm gets, embarrassed. Oh, well, he tries to deny it at first, but then he's like, yeah, I met somebody. That's the key word, somebody. Prince Eric did not say you've met a girl. He did not say you've met a young woman. He didn't say that. And for that reason, I absolutely believe that Prince Eric knows full well that Wilhelm's interests lie elsewhere. And he's actually supportive of it, because what does he say? He's like, you know what, go enjoy yourself now. Go enjoy your new crush, because the time is going to come when people start to have opinions. And then Wilhelm says, well, nobody cares about me. You're the crown prince. That is so important. Eric has just told us that he's a traditionalist. I don't care if you have a boyfriend. I'm totally good with that. But at some point, you're going to have to get married and produce an heir, because you're going to have to keep up the appearance. Because that's what Eric has said in other episodes. I don't care what you do, keep up the appearance. You have to play a certain role. You have to do it. And so I think the basis of the relationship and the closeness of the relationship between Eric and Wilhelm is based on the fact that they can be completely open with one another, and they are. And it's really sweet to watch. And then the moment comes when the banquet gets underway and the most important person, the highest person of status, enters the room. That would be Wilhelm. Now, I do find it interesting that nobody had to stand for him. If his mother and his father were there, I would think that they would have stood for him, maybe even for the crown prince. But for Wilhelm, it was enough that he was the last to arrive. And he pauses for a moment to be seen. And he looks over at August. August, of course, sits up straight because he's waiting for Wilhelm to come join him at the table, treating him like a tool. But I really enjoyed the fact that Wilhelm looked at August and you could see the wheels turning. And he's like, nah, I'd rather sit over here. And so he leaves, goes to sit with Simon. And of course, August is stunned. And you can see the stepfather is really enjoying this moment, because he looks over at August and says, oh, I thought he was going to sit with you. And look at his face. I'm going to freeze frame 2 shots. Notice his smile, and then how his smile turns into something different. That's good acting. And then, of course, the mother looks over at the stepfather with that look of, would you please stop? And that is my indication that behind the scenes, when they're at home, there is an awful lot of tension between these two. So Wilhelm goes and he goes over to the table, and now we see that it is Felice who's sitting up straight smiling, because she's told her parents, of course, about this possible relationship between her and Wilhelm. And so she's like, oh, he's going to come sit with us. Interesting that when Wilhelm comes over, she says, oh, hello, Wilhelm. And he barely acknowledges her by saying her name and, of course, giving her the barest, gesture with the hand. And then he turns his full attention to Simon. Simon is the only person he sees at that table. And it is Simon who he asks, may I join you? He's the prince. He doesn't need somebody's permission to join a table. But it was fascinating that to Simon, he did that. And, of course, Simon was happy to have him there. Please notice else something very interesting here about status. When Wilhelm sits down, he greets Felice's parents by their first names. These are incredibly wealthy, powerful people, and this 16-year-old kid just greets them by their first names. When I was a kid, oh, my parents would have flipped out if I had addressed an adult by their first name. And I don't think I addressed an adult by their first names until I was well into my 20s. If we enjoy this moment of brief happiness at the table, of course it is shattered by Sarah, because we find out that Felice has been lying to her parents about her work with the horse, her equestrian riding. And Sarah just can't take the hint from Felice to shut up, and she just keeps going. This is the moment that Felice's fantasy in front of her parents completely collapses. She is humiliated, and she gets up and walks away from the table. Now, I find it interesting, and I need to point out that as she's leaving from the table, her parents do not get up and follow her. August, who notices that she's leaving, doesn't get up and follow her. Nobody follows her out except Wilhelm. Being the classy young man that he is, he politely excuses himself and follows her out into the hallway.
So they go out into the hallway where Felice pours her heart out to Wilhelm and says, everybody thinks I'm perfect and I'm not. Everything I try to reach and do, I fail at. I am a failure. Wilhelm, again, being such a comforting, loving person, because I think he loves people above everything else. That's his greatest quality. He comforts her and says, no, I think you're perfect. Unfortunately, in her head, she had a fantasy built up about him, and she misinterprets his meaning and his words, and she leans in and kisses him, only for him to pull back and say, well, wait a second, I didn't mean it like that. And at that point, even the fantasy that she clung to, that there was going to be a connection between them, even that is now shattered. And she must feel like a complete failure.
Okay, now there was a really, really brief clip that was really easy to look past, and I want to bring us back there and I want to freeze the frame. If we look carefully at this frame, this is Felice's mother after the embarrassing episode of the table, waving a very friendly hello to Linda, Simon and Sarah's mother. Now this is a very, very wealthy woman waving a very friendly greeting to, a lower class woman, and she didn't have to make that greeting. She's in an open place. She could have easily ignored Linda. But the fact that she waved hello meant that she must have enjoyed the conversation at the lunch table, and maybe she's not the snob we took her for at first. Now here's another scene that I think is so fast that it's really easy to not pay attention to and look past. If we look in the distance, we can see August standing with his mother about to have the argument that really goes south. But please notice that this is taking place in a cemetery. It's a graveyard. Look at these headstones. I didn't even notice this the first time that I saw it. I was looking more at the people and not at the gravestones. And I have to wonder if right in the middle of this episode, this scene of a graveyard was very intentional and maybe a little bit of foreshadowing for the end of the episode. Simon, meanwhile, is dealing with his own drama. He not only has the money he's got to come up with to pay for these special tutoring sessions, but he also has to come up with the money to pay his dad back for the alcohol. So he's feeling that pressure. And as you know, he's been trying to get a hold of August to say, hey, August, give me the money that you owe me. Because from Simon's perspective, August has the money. Like August's mother told him earlier in this episode, if you need money, sell a statue, sell a painting, you can pay for your tuition 10 times over. But he just won't do it. Why won't he do it? Pride. So Simon, who will not go to his own father and talk to him about it, won't go to Wilhelm and talk about it. Why not? Well, same reason, pride. So you've got these two young men headed directly at each other for a conflict because of pride. So Simon, being frustrated, ends up calling his friends and saying, hey, let's go talk to August together. Maybe as a group he'll take us more seriously. From my perspective, it starts to look like a gang. All right. So when Simon is there and he starts to try to talk to August, August starts giving him excuses. Simon doesn't want to hear it. So he knocks August down onto the ground and gets violent. That's something that in Europe is taken very seriously. That doesn't work. So Simon's friends back up and say, hey, wait a minute. This is a little more than we bargained for. We want out of this. But what the situation ultimately did was force August to admit to the poorest, lowest class kid in the entire class that he in fact is broke. The one thing he absolutely 100% did not want to do, it's the one thing he was forced to do. Think he's going to forget that?
Meanwhile, Felice, who has not had a good day, whose self-esteem has been completely destroyed, decides that if I can't have Wilhelm, then I'll go for my number 2 choice. And she lowers herself by presenting herself to the half-naked August, telling him that she wants to be with him, and ends up climbing in bed with him. Her bad day just went to the worst possible. Bad decision on her part.
Part of what makes any good story interesting is that there are highs and there are lows. Same thing is true with any relationship. In every relationship, there are highs and there are lows. And the same thing is true with Wilhelm and Simon. In this situation, at the moment, they've patched things up and they're at a high point. They're planning to spend the weekend together. They're excited to be back together, and with good reason. Unfortunately, after August had the argument with his mother, he's no longer going home. He's going to be staying at the school. So Wilhelm has to break the news to Simon that even though we had plans to spend the weekend together here, I got to call it off because August is going to be here, and as you know, he breathes down my neck. Simon, as anybody would expect, as you certainly would expect, was disappointed. But then Wilhelm says, yeah, but I've got an alternative idea. How about we go to your house and hang out? And you can see by Simon's smile, that his positive reaction, that he's all in favor of that. And so we're back on a high note. And everything is going along swimmingly for these two. And they're walking out of the school together, getting ready to have a great weekend as all the other students are leaving. And of course, Wilhelm notices that everyone is all, looking at him and looking at their phones and then looking back at him. And then he's interrupted by the school psychologist and escorted away to the headmistress's office. And at this point, the news is broken to him by the queen that his brother is dead. This causes a host of problems for Wilhelm because, as we said earlier in the video, I don't know that Wilhelm was closer to any living human being than he was Eric. And he was allowed to be himself in front of his brother. And this was his one ally inside the court. And that's now gone. But in another sense, Eric was not only an ally, he was a shield. Because as long as Eric was there drawing the attention of the media, and quite frankly his parents, he could sort of hide in the shadows and live his life as quietly as he could manage. Obviously, with Eric gone, with the shield gone, Wilhelm is now front and center. There is no more hiding. And we're to the point now that Wilhelm either has to step up to his royal duties or register himself as a complete failure. And that's where we end this episode.
So I really hope that you enjoyed this review. I hope that you are continuing to enjoy this series. And please, by all means, jump into the comments section and share your thoughts with us. I read all of the comments. I may not necessarily have time to answer every single one of them, but boy, I sure try. And as ever, I love to know where you're watching this show from, and if you could attach your flag or let me know where you're from, I personally find that very interesting. I love the fact that so many people from around the world are coming together so passionately for this Swedish drama. It's amazing. It's amazing. And I'm so glad that you're here in the conversation. So until next episode, which we are already preparing, I wish you happiness and safety in 2023. Happy New Year.